All right, welcome everyone. I want to get us started on time so that we have plenty of time for any questions you all might have to ask us today. This is a little workshop we wanted to do on NIL and revenue sharing. We had one a couple of weeks ago on the coaching hot seat, and I recognize some of the names that are coming in already, and I remember some of you from the last one. We got some questions on NIL and revenue sharing, and they didn't really necessarily fit into our coaching conversation last time. So if you asked a question last time and we didn't answer it, I took a screenshot and we're actually going to get started with some of those today. So I am Christy Dosh. I'm a sports business reporter and I also do some consulting with College Sports Solutions. I call it a recovering attorney. I no longer practice, but I teach three or maybe now four different NIL classes at University of Florida in the journalism program, the sport management program, and the law school in both undergraduate and graduate courses. So NIL has sort of become my life. And then I'm the author of, well, I won't show it because we've got a background, but the author of the Athletes NIL Playbook is an NIL book I wrote that just came out this summer. And I am excited to be moderating this chat today with some guys that I often go to when I have questions and want to figure out how we're all going to sort of live and operate in this new reality. So I'll introduce these gentlemen to you before we get going here with some of these great questions we got last time. So first up on the left-hand side of our duo here, you've got Jeff Schemmel. Jeff is the founder and the president of College Sports Solutions. With more than 3 decades of leadership in college athletics, he's served as an athletic director and also had key roles with the NCAA and conferences. He advises athletic departments nationwide on things like strategic planning, operational reviews, naming rights, and gender equity initiatives. And I'm very lucky that Jeff brought me on a while back, and I've gotten to work on many of those projects with him. Next to him, they are live from Tammy's Sports Bar and Grill in Fairhope, Alabama. So they are coming to us from a more fun venue than I'm sitting in right now in my office. Jeff is sitting there with John Hartwell. He is a partner and consultant with College Sports Solutions, also a former athletic director with nearly 30 years of NCAA Division I experience. He's also a CPA, so he brings a little bit something different to the table there. He has led athletic departments with major coaching hires, facilities projects, and program building efforts across multiple institutions. And then last but not least, Rick Perko. He most recently served as the Vice President of Development at the Brandar Group, where he helped lead NIL group licensing initiatives for more than 20,000 student athletes across 100 Division I programs. He brings extensive experience in sports business and technology, having previously served as CEO of Score Shots and Immersion Media and began his career at the NCAA. So these guys are a wealth of knowledge, and you all asked such great questions on NIL and revenue sharing during the last workshop. We knew we had to dedicate a whole workshop just to that. And we could probably do far more than the hour we're about to do. But I thought we would start with the questions we missed last time because people sent in some great ones and I didn't want them to think they asked for nothing. And we spend so much time talking about NIL and revenue sharing among the Power Four, but we got a couple of questions last time that wanted to know a little bit more about what NIL looks like at the mid-major level. So this person asked, at mid-majors, how do players learn about NIL or collective opportunities? Are there even those kind of opportunities? And they went on to ask some kind of follow-up question was that. And we got another question as well that said, is there really any NIL happening outside of the Power Four? John, I thought I would start with you since your last AD stop was not at a Power Four, and you probably got to see a little bit of NIL. What did that look like there, or what do you think it does look like outside of the Power Four?
Sure, and I'll give an individual example of that. So, most recently I was at ULM, Louisiana Monroe as the AD. Ahmad Hardy, who was a running back last year at ULM, led the nation amongst true freshmen in yardage for a true freshman, tests the NIL market, and he goes to Missouri where he is getting substantially more. He got a little bit at ULM. I would say at that level, roughly $1 million all in, and primarily has been in football and men's basketball, and about 80% of that in football. But some of the group of fives have been creative and not necessarily making cash payments, but free housing, use of automobiles, things like that. So it is going on, and really, um, uh, to be competitive, you've got to be in the game to some extent if you're at the FBS level. But another area of that is when you look at schools that don't have football, the Marquettes, the Creightons, the Wichita States, who can devote a larger percentage of their resources to NIL, it gives them some advantage as well.
Rick, I was going to ask you about it too, because I know the Brandar Group isn't exclusively just working at the Power Four level. What do you think that looks like from a group licensing opportunity outside of the Power Four?
Yeah, so we used to describe NIL opportunities sort of being on two tracks. One track was licensing, one track was like the corporate sponsorship. So on the licensing side, which is jerseys, t-shirts, trading cards, video games, at the very least, every group of five school can have and probably could or should have apparel deals. Jerseys, t-shirts, hats, mugs, whatever it is. That should happen through group licensing pretty much anywhere. We did that with a lot of group of five schools and found some significant success. Now, the downside to that is you can make a lot more money on the corporate side through advertisements, through that sort of engagement than you can in licensing. And that's where, what John was talking about. It is harder to do that. But what we I think we found is there are local businesses in many of these communities who are interested in providing NIL opportunities to student athletes. You've got to kind of find the right fit. If you've got somebody who's a corporate partner who has a set of convenience stores or other sorts of outlets to do something in an area where you can get some bang for your buck. I think we saw several of those sorts of opportunities as well. So again, more activity in licensing than in sponsorships, more money in sponsorships than licensing.
That's Jeff, anything else you want to add in on that?
Yeah, the only other thought I have, and we talked a lot about NIL here, but most schools, most Division One schools have opted into the rev share, and uh, they're not going to be a Power Four where that first year they're given $20.5 million to spread among their athletes. But they're all in the game. Most are in the game. Most Division Ones have opted in. And so the zeros are different. It could be one school could have $500,000 in total rev share money as compared to the 20 and a half, and everywhere in between. I have a son who's the athletic director at the University of South Dakota, and they opted in, and they're going to share revenue, but at a much less reduced number than the Power Four for sure, and probably the Group of Six for sure. But they want everyone's looking for their niche. Everyone's looking for where they want to put their money.
And to be, if I could just add to that, to be sure, I think if you've got local companies, corporations, entities that are donating money to the athletics department for revenue sharing, they are likely to be less inclined to also find NIL deals for athletes because that money is getting to the athletes one way or another anyway. So it becomes a little bit of a challenge at some campuses of limited resources and what are you going to ask for as athletics director and how do you plan to deploy it for revenue sharing where you have control over it, or to NIL resources where there's a little bit of a return for the business involved in it. So there are some decisions that have to be made on the campus level when it comes to that.
Hey, Christy, I just wanted to add one other thing that Jeff brought up. And I think a lot of times when you say opt in versus opt out, I know there are some institutions. I was speaking to an FCS athletic director earlier this morning, and some of those who have opted out this first time around are changing their mind now. I think it's really important when you say you opt in, doesn't force you to have to do anything, but it gives you the flexibility to be able to participate.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people opted in when the grandfathering of roster limits took place too, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got some more questions here from last time, but I just want to say to everybody who's here live this time, I've got the Q&A open. So if you hear us talking about something and you've got a follow-up question or you've got a new question, just pop that in the Q&A and I will try to make sure that we get to everything. Okay, excuse me. Another good question that we had from last time is how NIL and revenue sharing are going to impact apparel contracts going forward for athletic departments. Or even this person asked, I've got a couple of different questions I'm combining here. Somebody else asked, what's your perspective on whether jersey patch deals or other new sponsor inventory will become part of these agreements as schools look for fresh revenue streams to offset revenue sharing costs? So, what have we seen so far in terms of changes in an athletic department's apparel contracts or maybe other sponsorship inventory that relates to NIL or revenue sharing?
Well, I'll do this really quick, but I think the philosophy is changing. In the past, I think we've been very hesitant relative to putting whatever insignias or patches or whatever on gear or even on floors in venues. I think that's all gone now. I think everyone is looking for not only many revenue streams, but to maximize those revenue streams. So I think you're going to see more and more of that, Christy.
We had some experience with this at the Brandar Group. We actually sold in the first practice patch jersey for men's basketball team that was now a group of 6 school. And there was pandemonium, not necessarily in a good way either. when we did that, we were trying to do it from the player's perspective and making sure they get paid fairly and the institution as well. So we ran into a couple things depending on who the apparel manufacturer was. For example, our understanding is this is more common at Nike schools than at others, but you have restrictions in a lot of Nike contracts. If you want to put, for example, on a practice jersey, maybe a game jersey as well, a sponsor, you've got to pay for that right. You got to pay Nike for that right, or you've got to get a waiver to get it done. And so, because the apparel manufacturers want to control their product, practice jerseys, shorts, jerseys, game warm-ups, shoes, I mean, anything you can think of, they want to protect that inventory as being theirs. To Jeff's point, I see that starting to go away. I think athletics directors will probably get better at saying, as part of a new contract, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to keep our options open here. Maybe we'll give you a right of first refusal to participate in that, but we're not going to agree to this restriction right out of the gate. And I did see notice not long ago that for game apparel, I would expect that to be available in the believe it's a 2026 fall season. So you look to next football, volleyball, soccer, those seasons. I get the feeling that the Division I oversight committee is going to approve that to happen. But it'll be really interesting to see how Adidas, Under Armour, Nike sort of manages, and how athletics directors might feel more emboldened now than they ever have to push back for their own financial security.
Yeah, to follow up on the apparel contracts, I do think in the most recent iterations that people have done with the apparel folks and shoe providers, there is a carve out there. I mean, previously, you never saw anything about what percentage goes to NIL that needs to go directly to student athletes. It had all been to the department, and quite frankly, one of the significant revenue streams of departments, and that will still be the case. But I think you're going to see more of a trend towards some going towards rev share and NIL. And we really haven't seen this pushed yet, but at some point, when is an Adidas school going to have an individual who has been sponsored by Nike throughout, their high school career, and somebody really push the envelope on that situation there?
Yeah, and Jeff and John, I think both of you can probably speak to this. My sort of follow-up for this that I was thinking about as Rick was talking is what's the, I guess, how do you what's the strategy to go into one of these negotiations with a Nike and Under Armour and Adidas and simultaneously ask for more money, which you're definitely going to be doing, but also then potentially limit their rights so that you keep open this ability to do something like a jersey patch or to have other sponsorship on, whether it's practice uniforms or game uniforms. How do you balance asking for more money, but essentially telling them we need to hold back some rights this time?
Yeah, that's the art of the negotiation now, Christy. I think you're right. I think a good AD is well prepared when he walks into that negotiation and has already figured out how to maximize that revenue. And if that means combining the Nikes and the Adidases and the Under Armours of the world with the other people that want to put patches on the gear and that sort of thing, you already have a really good idea of how to maximize that revenue. And that may mean that one of those apparel companies is going to pay you less, and they're going to give you less. So you're really going to have to be prepared for a negotiation like that and realize, uh, yes, if you've had a exclusive contract with Nike, Adidas, or Under Armour, and all of a sudden you don't want it to be exclusive, they're probably not going to pay you the kind of money that you've been getting.
One other really interesting point that John brought up that's worth commenting on is this past year, thinking of Cooper Flag, he had a deal with New Balance when Duke wears Nike. So that's off the court, right? So that's phase one of what John's talking about. Phase two is what happens when, not if, but when an athlete says, I'm also going to wear this in the game because I like them better. I have a deal with them, like you can do in the NBA. And we haven't talked about, and maybe we won't get into it too much about collective bargaining. I'm not saying a union, but just collective bargaining. Um, Ultimately, I think it will look more like the NBA, what we're talking about. When, I'm not sure, but I think it will.
And just to follow up Rick's point there, you can bet your life that there will be litigation over that issue that Rick just talked about.
All right.
Yeah,
Have
and
you?
when you look at the overall deal, just to follow up on what Jeff was talking about, you've got to have an idea as an athletic director or your committee, whoever's making that determination on which of the footwear and apparel providers you're going to utilize. Hey, how much is it worth? And you're going to have an idea of that up front before you sign an agreement. How much of a reduction from that side are you going to be able to offset with XYZ company's logo on practice apparel or game jerseys or anything like that? I do hope for the integrity of what those uniforms and practice jerseys look like going forward. And no disrespect to NASCAR, but we don't need to get to the point to where we've got NASCAR working on our jerseys. Hopefully they will be limited and uniform in size and color combinations and all of those things.
Thought I'd add one more thing too, and I hope I don't butcher this. It's a story I wrote a long time ago, and I think a podcast episode I did a long time ago. But something sort of outside of the box that I've seen, University of Cincinnati in their deal with Hanes brand, and Rick, you might know something about this from Brandar Group. I can't remember if Brandar was involved in this or not, but in their deal with Hanes and the Champions brand, they have internships for their students, some of whom are student athletes. And so they're working in these other sort of opportunities that aren't cash to the athletes, but are valuable, experiences and resume building. And they've really made that an integral part of their apparel strategy is creating these hands-on opportunities for students and student athletes. And I wish I could remember more detail of it. I'm going to butcher it, but I thought that was really neat too. Like that's some added value. And it's a thing that when I talk to student athletes, one of the number one things they complain about, and this was before NIL, but it continues, is that they don't feel prepared after graduation compared to their peers because they haven't had time to do internships. And so I've seen some athletes on their own doing some cool NIL deals where they ask for a micro internship or they ask to shadow the CEO for a day, and they're asking for these experiential things in part of their deal, not just for cash. And I think that's so smart because athletes are really limited in the time they have to put into something like an internship that their peers are getting to do. So I think that's a neat strategy too for athletic departments to work those kind of experiential things into their new contracts. And that's like one more thing you can offer your student athletes to help prepare them for their future, not just straight cash opportunities.
Yeah, I do have some knowledge of that and a few other programs along the way as well. It's really replicating what the players associations have done when they recognized years and years ago that these athletes who are making so much money are finishing their careers when they're still in their 20s and don't really have the capacity to participate in the workforce the way they'd hoped to. So I think it's borrowing some of the best practices from the players associations to do that. And if you think about NIL, there's perhaps the top 1% that are getting game-changing money that are in a different category, but 99% of the athletes that are even getting NIL money need something like this. Like I'm aware, for example, that a really prominent Power Four school that once you get past the two deep on the football team, and this is a school that's committed to 20.5 million revenue share and probably another 20 million in NIL, those athletes, I don't want to shake my head at this, it's $10,000 a year. Is it helpful? Yes. Is it meaningful? Yes, of course it is. But is it a game-changing opportunity? No, I don't think it is. So I think that desire for most of the student athletes at Power Four schools, much less group of six or basketball centric schools, is definitely there.
Right. Another question we had come in, and I'm going to add a little bit of sort of current events news I've heard the last week to this question, is about how athletic departments can sort of balance and work with their collectives or other third-party sort of companies they're hiring to assist with fundraising. And somebody asked this during our last session, and it made me think of now what I've seen in the past week is this news about Oregon State hiring, I think it was Blueprint Sports, to assist with outside fundraising. And the initial reports, I remember reading it and thinking, I don't feel like this is a great deal for Oregon State, but I was reading something else this morning that I guess the original percentages that were put out there weren't correct anyway. And so Oregon State's AD was trying to set the record straight about why it made sense for them to do that. But I don't know which one of you is best suited to speak to this, but how do you balance? Obviously, you're trying to fundraise through your own development team, but many folks are also trying to fundraise through an outside collective or through a third party company like this to produce either to help supplement money for revenue sharing or to produce opportunities outside of revenue sharing. How do you best balance that so you're not leaning on the same donors over and over, or you don't, run out of folks to fundraise from?
Well, I'm gonna go first there because Scott Barnes is a good friend, and I have great respect for Scott. And Oregon State is one of those that was dealt a tough hand when the other Pac-12 schools left. So Scott has, I think, thought long and hard about this and how to create. Believe me, his whole goal is to create more revenue to give opportunities to Oregon State student athletes. And I think certainly the homework that was done on this particular endeavor, I think is probably the first of many that you're going to see around the country that they're going to do this. They're going to hire outside entities or partner with outside entities to help them create more revenue in a number of spaces. This just happens to be in the fundraising space for Oregon State. So I applaud what Scott has done at Oregon State and in a pretty tough situation there.
I think the schools have done it the best. There's strong collaboration there. I was talking earlier this week with Walker Jones, who runs the Grove Collective for Ole Miss. And he has the benefit because he and Keith Carter were student athletes at Ole Miss together at the same time. So they've had a long time friendship and relationship. But the ability to collaborate that, because you're right, Christy, if you don't have some collaboration, there's cannibalism, and you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. But they've done a really good job of that, and I think you're going to see more and more schools utilize that type of model.
And I think one of the most important things that I think all of us who are former ADs or current ADs, one hand has to know what the other is doing. And the communication factor when you're bringing in outside entities, not unlike an outside entity to do your ticketing or multimedia rights, and particularly multimedia rights now with NIL, because we have to know what's going on. I look at what Clemson has done, and Christy, you're very familiar with that. Graham Neff has put a new entity together that is just all about revenue, and he's brought everybody under that umbrella, and I think you're going to see more of that as well.
One observation to make that we saw in the work that we did at Brandar for those years is that, and I was wrong about this initially. I thought there would be this widespread, overwhelming donor fatigue after a couple of years, and it turns out I was sort of half right. There was donor fatigue, but not everywhere. There are some programs around this country that have individuals of incredibly high net worth that are able to continue to stroke checks and to make investments in programs. And so it makes the job at some of these schools all the more critical to try to keep up, because the challenge may not be as much with how you're going to get the 20.5 million. It's the delta, or the difference, if you will, between the 20.5 million you can give out and the 40 or 50 million that you've committed. And how many there are. Most Power Four schools, I think, who can get to 20.5, and maybe they can even figure out a way to do that on a sustainable way, a sustainable path. But to have to do 40 or 50 or what might look like 60 before too long, I think it separates in a greater way. We're not talking about separating Power Four from Group of Six. We're talking about separating Power Four from within Power Four at that point.
We talked earlier about jersey patches, sort of one idea, but have you guys seen other creative ideas, or are there certain avenues you think departments should be looking to in terms of untapped revenue opportunities? I mean, I know everybody's trying to figure out how to increase their revenue. Anything creative or that you think is sort of coming or starting to become more of a trend?
I'll go first. I think the one I'm most intrigued by, I think, is the public-private partnership on the development side of life. I'm going to use Iowa State as an example. Jamie Pollard has put together, next to their stadium, if you're familiar with Atlanta, you know what the Battery looks like next to the Braves' new stadium. And in Jamie Pollard is doing something very similar to that in Ames, Iowa, and getting partners that are developers, and they'll bring restaurants and hotels and that sort of thing that's going to be right there next to their football stadium. And that partnership is going to create brand new revenue for the Iowa States of the world. And I'm most intrigued by that because I think it's very unique.
I like that.
Yeah, and this is sort of along the same lines as what Iowa State is doing, but I know there are several groups looking at doing. We talked about housing earlier being one of the things that's being provided that goes beyond the cash component of it. But people doing condo complexes, apartment complexes, that part of the lure to get donors, fans to invest in those is saying, hey, half of the units in here are going to be student athletes. Half of these units are going to be dedicated to NIL projects. And as we all have experienced rabid fans, there are some folks who say, hey, I don't want to have a frat party around wherever I'm buying a condo, but there are some who gravitate to that and will pay premium dollar to do that.
The other thing that I've seen, keeping an eye on Florida State, they seem to have committed to a number of concerts and even a professional bull riders event in their football stadium. So, Jeff and John talking about new facilities, new building. There's also, I think, a desire to take advantage of what you already have and see what you can make out of that. I don't know what the damage to the facility is going to be, the turf, the grass. I mean, there's some trade-offs in doing things like that. But I think so far the numbers, at least, of what you can make doing those sorts of things with concerts and other sorts of sporting events, I think it's substantial. Florida State's really leaning in hard, and I certainly have seen that at other places around the country as well, and expect that will continue.
Trying to quickly search through my email. Someone else has pitched me a story, Jeff, and it wasn't your example. And I want to say it was somewhere out in California, the same sort of idea of this, multi-use development around the football stadium. And now I just can't remember who it was. I looked through my email and I can't find it. But as soon as we'll get off this, of course, I'll remember who it was. But I do think that is an intriguing idea going forward, and one I've heard some of the folks on the architectural side talking about as they try to figure out, as more money is going to revenue sharing, you've got the, architects who are used to doing stadium upgrades and building new stadiums in college sports, and maybe not as much money is going to be put towards facilities anymore. So they're all trying to figure out how to survive in this new ecosystem as well.
And I've heard or seen some schools talking about taking gambling revenues from the state as well, and that's going to be something that people are really going to have to knuckle down on and decide if they want to do that. But that's another source of sort of new revenue that maybe wasn't available a few years ago.
And that's happening right now in Louisiana. As John, you know it better than I do. So,
Yeah, that was something that I won't say it was original to Louisiana. I got a lot of the information from North Carolina and Doug Gillen at Appalachian State because they were one of the pioneers in that area, but we were able to get it in the state of Louisiana with the help of the legislature with a tax percentage on online sports wagering that is going to benefit all 10 four-year schools to the tune of about $2.3 million a year to start with, and that's only going to grow.
Yeah, an important business principle for all this, which this gambling fits under, is what can you identify that's low effort, big return? Are there such things? And once you get into high effort, high return, it becomes, I think, a much harder execution to move forward with because it's a lot of effort, a lot of perhaps legal risk, damage to facilities, thinking about concerts, bull riding events. So I think that's probably the litmus test. What's the least amount of effort I can put in to get the biggest return? And there may not be too many of those, or we may be waiting for the next one to be identified.
Which kind of leads nicely into how do we all feel about private equity or other types of private investment? Obviously, the big news over the past week has been the kind of buzz about the Big Ten and what they may or may not do with private investment. That one doesn't sound like an actual private equity deal, but would be investment from this University of California pension fund coming in with this separate Big Ten enterprises they would form to hold their media rights and other licensing rights. What do we think about that as an option for revenue generation when we start letting in private equity or private investors into college athletics? Is that a viable revenue stream or no?
I think it's a slippery slope because again, those folks who have experience with private equity, both on the side of the businesses who have had an influx of cash because of it, those weekly calls are not, a bed of roses. Those weekly calls are, hey, what have you done this week to help drive revenues to help us get our money back and plus 10% or whatever that interest rate may be. I know it's a little longer runway that's being talked about in college athletics. And I'm not saying that it won't be done, but there are repercussions that nobody that's involved in college athletics right now, I think, understand the magnitude of literally weekly calls about driving revenue and limiting expenditures.
So I've got. Go ahead, Jeff.
Go ahead, Rick.
I've got some experience in raising capital and selling a company, and It's you can really get enamored with the possibility of bringing in revenue to cover anticipated expenses and to grow your program. I I think it's inevitable that it will happen. Somebody and maybe it's a bit of hubris. Um, you get enamored with what it can do. I think somebody's going to do it. It may be the Big Ten that goes first, and then to John's point, it's a question of how you structure that. How do you protect yourself? I think I just think that it's going to happen. That people are going to do this. Um, I think part of it may happen because the NCAA doesn't have the same degree of autonomy it did 6 months ago or a year ago. College football playoffs operate independently. There are groups trying to separate and operate other championships independently. And so, with that kind of independence comes less restriction, less governance, less oversight. So, you really have to sort of mind your P's and Q's to be sure. But I just think of it as inevitable. And I'm not going to be surprised if the Big Ten pushes forward with this sometime this fall.
And I would follow up on what Rick is saying there. I think the devil is always going to be in the detail here, and both sides of this equation are going to look for an increased return on their own investment. And that's the struggle that I've had, at least with what I've seen so far, is these groups of investors are investing because they are expecting a return and a substantial return. And so when those of us on campuses or in conference offices that are trying to make ends meet already, so we're gonna share some of that with somebody else. That's a difficult one. And it's happening at every level, as you all know. There's a private equity firm that has at least made strides at an offer to run the FCS football playoffs and do it independently of the NCAA. And I'm not sure the NCAA wants to let go of that, but you might look for there might be a partnership that's coming there. And again, I think that's in its infant stages, but it's happening. And to Rick's point, I think it's inevitable. It's going to happen. And as I said, the devil's going to be in the details, how that eventually looks.
I mean, ultimately, Christy, um, we're in this time of massive change in my mind. I think the House settlement is but an interlude. It's been identified as, in many people's minds, as sort of this seminal event that's restructured and put a framework around college athletics. To be sure, part of that, in my mind, is true. But I think the biggest change is potentially what's to come. So many big issues out there that have revenue potential and NIL potential, starting with whether the group of or the Power Four conferences decide to separate. There was an editorial in the New York Times this weekend from the president at I think University of San Diego about the fact that that would be a good thing. The Knight Commission has suggested that in previous years as a good thing. I think we're going to see so much more change in the next decade than we've seen in the previous decade. As difficult and disruptive as the past, say, 5 years have been, I think there will actually be more disruption to manage in the next decade ahead.
Christy, one other thing to mention here. I think the whole topic of tax exempt status of universities and athletic departments has taken a back burner. But again, with all of these potential revenue influxes, I think that topic is going to come back up again. And, you used to hear the term all the time in college athletics, unrelated business income tax, better known as UBIT. And that's kind of fallen by the wayside too. But I think if all of a sudden you see a very large influx of cash revenues into these departments, these topics are going to come back to the forefront.
Somebody asked in the chat about how NIL has been affecting athletic department staffing. And I want to kind of piggyback off the conversation we were just having. If you are coming up in this field, you're taking your first job in college athletics, or maybe you're partway up the ladder at this point, with it seeming like things change on a weekly, if not daily basis. How do you position yourself to continue to grow as an athletic department, staffer who wants to move up? How do you prepare for a future that we don't know exactly what it's going to look like?
Well, I think we do so much work to try to help institutions and athletic departments become more efficient. And I think in answer to that specific question, Christy, we're going to start, athletic departments are going to start asking their staff to wear more hats. And they're going to, and if you're willing to do that, if you're willing to step up and say, yes, I know I've been over here in ticketing, but I would be happy to do something internal as well, or fundraise for you. I think the advice to those people is walk into your boss's office and say, I'm willing to wear more hats. And I know we've got to be more efficient. We've got to spend less and produce more. So let me be part of that. Let me be part of that equation.
I'll use, not to pick on the compliance folks, but I mean, how many examples have we talked about here recently where, hey, the NCAA rule book used to be this thick, now it's shrunk down. So compliance departments are shrinking right now. So back to Jeff's point about making yourself invaluable, even though you may be an entry-level person who starts out in marketing and promotions or compliance or the business office or whatever. Hey, expose yourself. Ask your supervisors to give you at least a taste of some of these other areas where you make yourself invaluable across many different of the silos that exist in college athletics.
One of the observations I would have is that fundamental, I think all of us on this call have developed our careers through relationship building. We're relationship oriented. And I think college athletics has become more transaction oriented than ever before. So part of it is an acceptance that my job has to look different. The expectations of me are going to be different. I'm going to have to maybe think about doing things, keep my relationship orientation, because that's going to help you grow in your job, find other opportunities, move along in your career, but also recognize there's a lot of transactional nature to this that didn't used to be there 5 years ago. And to embrace that, I think would be key as well.
And I think just being aware of what's happening at your peers, at what's happening at other institutions, whether that's subscribing to D1 Ticker or having a list of people that you follow on Twitter, X, whatever it is now, or, that you're following on LinkedIn, like to be tied in on an almost, if not daily basis to what other programs are doing, so that if you're sitting in a meeting and, there's a discussion about how to generate more revenue, you can be like, hey, I saw that so-and-so is trying this. Like, have we thought about doing that? I think being aware of sort of those trends and innovation so that you can bring them to your own campus. I don't know. I haven't worked in a college athletic department, but it seems to me like that would be valuable.
When you say daily, that's the right word. We wake up every day and something new has happened in college athletics, that whether it's new litigation or it's somebody else has decided to do something very dramatic. I think we're seeing maybe a little bit of an example of the changing environment around, just by the number of coaching changes or at least firings that have taken place in a relatively early part of the season in football, especially at the Power 4 level. So it's a different world for sure.
Yeah, the number of significant business decisions are happening at a more rapid pace, and there are more of them than I can ever remember. And so you have got to sort of put on your seatbelt every morning and sort of be prepared for change. You have to, this industry for years wasn't really known like that. You had, any business thrives in a stable environment. The stock market thrives when there's stability. My sense is we don't have as much stability in intercollegiate athletics as we want, because there are so many actors that are behaving in ways that people who have been in this industry for so long maybe don't understand or don't agree with, but they're happening. And so I think part of that is to, again, sort of embrace that change. And you've just got to read and talk to people, because you learn so much as a young person trying to grow from don't put your head down in the sand, but you just got to continue to read everything you can within some limitations, of course, talk to people, learn everything that you can. To Jeff's point earlier, if you throw yourself into other opportunities, your learning curve, your ability to take on multiple tasks is just going to increase your value.
This person also asked, are there certification and compliance courses or other things in regards to the changing dynamics of NIL? What are some good ones to grow in this field? I will selfishly plug mine. So I have a certification at University of Florida, non-credit, so you don't have to be a Florida student, through their Institute for Coaching Excellence. And that was built for coaches and administrators and even agents and attorneys. And you get an actual certificate at the end of it that you can put on your resume and put yourself out there. And you get access to a Slack channel with me, even after you're done with the course. And I'm constantly dropping news and analysis in there as things happen. So I will selfishly plug my own. But do you guys have any advice for anything, conferences to attend or courses to take or certifications to get?
I think this goes back to our last question. You've got to be flexible, because I'll ask you, Christy, what you taught in your class in the fall of 24, how much of that has changed, say, fast forward to the fall of 25?
I update my classes every week. So I had a student last week ask me in my classes for students at UF, could I open the modules early? And I said no, because things change. And I'm putting it in on like Sunday night for it to open on Monday mornings, because that's how fast things change. In fact, we're doing this module everybody in my class is on this week is on the house settlement. And this kind of leads into the next question that somebody asked, but I had to go in there and put in that now there's this tip line for NIL Go, that if you think someone hasn't reported their deal, you can now, call this tip line or fill out a form online to turn people in. That didn't exist 2 weeks ago. So I went and added that into the class. And so no joke, I teach at 4 different, undergrad, grad, law school, and this outside certificate course. I am updating every few days. It's really, really fun to teach when it's constantly changing. But it does change that fast. Like, that's how quickly you have to be able to pivot and adapt to it. And what was true a year ago, like, might not even be true at all anymore. So I have to constantly comb through my stuff too and make sure I've taken out things that aren't accurate anymore, because it changes so fast.
And I would
So
echo, I
oh,
would
go ahead.
echo what Rick said, and that is, this should be a daily thing for, we are learning stuff every day. We are finding out new information every day. And if your nose isn't into the ticker or whatever other sources of information you're looking at, you're not keeping up, because it is changing on a regular basis, daily, if not hourly.
Would say I think probably I would be surprised if anyone who's on here isn't subscribed to D1 Ticker, but I read that twice a day when it comes out, and like live by that. And then Matt Brown's Extra Points newsletter too, I would highly recommend. He does deeper dives. D1 Ticker is kind of aggregating what other people have written, and Matt is writing original content, and those are my go-tos. Every single newsletter that comes from either one of them, I might have to save it and not get to it till tomorrow, but I'm going to read it at some point, because you just can't stay on top of things otherwise. So I would highly recommend
Matt's
those.
really good. Matt's really good too, because he throws his personality into what he writes. I like that. Yeah.
And he doesn't cover just the Power Four. He does a really nice job of covering, the group of five, mid majors, like D2 even. So he's a good follow, because it's not just all Power Four information. Okay, speaking of NIL Go, we have another question about NIL Go. And it's funny because I just got asked this in a class earlier today that I was in virtually. This person said, I would be curious what this group estimates will happen with NIL Go, given all of the challenges thus far and the reports that schools and entities are pushing deals through anyway due to the lead time. I got asked this in an earlier class. How do we feel about NIL Go and their ability to sort of stick around and be relevant and enforce rules?
I'm interested in what Rick wants to say here.
So, again, in the changing nature of this whole enterprise, what I think today might be different in a month. But right now, my feeling is that it's not effective. CBS had a poll that they put out after talking to ADs. I saw that maybe in the last week to 10 days, and it was 50-50 at best in terms of the way Division I ADs thought about NIL Go. My sense is human beings what they are, that those who set it up, primarily the Power Four, Pac-12, NCAA, especially the Power Four, will continue to double down on it um, despite its ineffectiveness. There is no enforcement mechanism. So from an enforcement perspective, we are in the same place we've been in the past 4+ years. And that's one of the reasons why I think some of the collectives and other third parties are just doing the deals. They're just paying the athletes. Um, I have serious concerns about whether this is going to be effective at all, but I don't see the plug being pulled on it for a while, because if you do that, then you have this even bigger void, and then you've got to solve for that. Um, I just don't. Again, I talked earlier about the fact that change is going to be perhaps even more rapid in the years to come, and this is an area in which maybe that change is simply the fact that NIL Go is not operating the way it should, and we've got people use the term wild west so often in the last 4 years, and maybe it's still got one wild in it. Maybe it's not just Wild West, but it's still there.
It's funny you say that, Rick, because I was getting ready to say the same thing. I was talking to a coach the other day who said it's still the wild west with more money involved in it. So that's
Yeah, and I think the what was put together for NIL Go, they're obviously understaffed. They need to bring more people in, but most importantly, I think, shoot, the three of us have been in this business for a lot of years, and we're still learning on a daily basis. We're still figuring it out on a daily basis. And if you bring people into NIL Go that don't have at least some background and experience in college athletics and what's been going on here, the learning curve is going to be just too much. And I think if there's a piece of advice I'd give to them, it's get people involved who have been around and understand what's happening.
Christy, one other thing, one of my most significant observations from working with Brandar and doing so many big corporate NIL deals is that your revenue share amount is 20.5 million. And we know the Power Four schools in some cases have offered contracts that in aggregate at a school are, say, 50 million. We know from our work, you can't get there in legitimate NIL deals from 20 to 50. There's just not enough deals. And then if you try to multiply that across 70 schools, it just doesn't work. It just doesn't fit. So now some of that was because so many deals were front loaded in advance of the House settlement. So it'd be really interesting to see what happens next year. Will that $45-50 million aggregate commitment be reduced? Hard for me to think it will. But there just aren't enough NIL deals, which makes me really strongly believe that, again, people are just doing their own thing and figuring out a way to get money to athletes. And we've seen this before, Christy, you've seen it. Contracts signed by players, agreements signed by players that aren't then met by the school. That's resulted in litigation in at least one school in Florida, I think. And I think those things are happening in other places as well. So this has all the signs of being chaotic going forward.
Yeah.
And when we talk about factors that ramp this up, I mean, just look at again, the number of coaches who have been let go already, and we're halfway through the football season. So until there are teeth put into NIL Go and the enforcement side of things, the pressure to continue to push the envelope further and further is going to continue, because the pressure to win is you're getting people fired every week because they have not won enough.
And, last I heard, they did a media briefing, the College Sports Commission did that I was on. That's probably been a little over a month ago now. And right after that, they came out with their initial numbers for how many deals have been put into the platform. And on the call, they had 3 full-time employees and they were hiring their fourth. And they were hand reviewing everything, which on the one hand, I think is good because I'm not sure that AI can do this any better, but they're hand reviewing everything and they put those numbers out. And what I saw in those numbers combined with what I'm hearing, especially from collectives, is sure, they're not declining the collective deals. They're just not doing anything. They are sitting in the system. There are collectives who have deals they put in July that are still in the system, according to the collectives, that haven't been approved or declined. They're just sitting there. And then when they get declined, sometimes they can add some more deliverables and then push it through. But as of that call and a follow-up I had with them a few weeks ago, there were no cases yet in arbitration, so there weren't any athletes that were fighting a decline. But there were plenty of collectives who were questioning whether they were going to continue to put deals in, which I think is how we ended up with this tip line. But if they've only got 4 full-time employees, I'd love to know, on top of reviewing the contracts that are coming in, and then now you've got a tip line, you got to listen to all these calls and then investigate whether these things are true or not. Like, I just don't see how they have the bandwidth to do everything they need to do. And then this class I was talking to earlier today, we were talking about how NIL go doesn't really mean anything to anybody until there is some sort of actual enforcement action, and there hasn't been one. So it's just like an idea, up in the cloud that no one really believes in because nothing has come of it at this point.
Yeah, there are no consequences. So people are still going to just do the deals they think they need to do at whatever level they think they need to do them.
And based ultimately on the amount of the contract obligations you've made. If you've made $50 million worth of contract obligations, you've got some responsibility in a weird way to making sure you pay that, as you've indicated. NIL go be damned. I've got 50 million I got to account for, so I'm gonna get the 50 million out. That's a safer bet than taking a risk with NIL go saying no. Because if they say no and I've got 50 million in commitments over here, what am I going to do on the player side?
Yep.
That kind of leads into the final question I wanted to throw out while we've got a few minutes left, and that's the actual revenue sharing contracts that are being offered to athletes. I mean, they look vastly different from one school to the next. I showed some in my law school class this semester. I showed them one that's 2 pages from a mid-major basketball program compared to one that's almost 20 pages from a Power 4 football program. So they really vary. But we've heard a lot of discussion about there being clawback provisions or buyout provisions in these contracts, attempts by athletic departments to protect themselves against athletes transferring. I've even seen a couple that have a right of first refusal. So if another school makes you an offer, you've got to bring it to your current school and let them try to match it. With your, athletic director kind of hats on, Jeff and John, how can you try and protect your investment? And like, if an athlete wants to go, I mean, chances are they're gonna go. Like, is this any different than how you approach a coach's contract? How do athletic departments protect themselves going forward?
Well, a couple thoughts I have there, certainly, and have had discussions with a number of athletic directors about it on the rev share side of life. The transfer portal is a big part of this. And so do you create a contract that addresses the transfer portal? Well, maybe that is, we'll pay you once the window is closed. If we have a football bowl game, you have to play in the bowl game if you're going to get your revenue. And I think it goes to another subject, Christy, that you and I have talked about with the NCAA, and that is, and maybe it's now with the CSC, I don't know, but there are representatives, is what we'll call them, not agents, because there's no certification process for anybody that says they want to represent a student athlete right now. And I think, and I know, Rick, you've had this discussion with Senator Cantwell, I think, because she talked about it in her her testimony the other day about agents and certification process for agents so that we don't have somebody just hanging up a shingle and saying, I represent John Hartwell. And we've got to get our arms around that for sure.
Yeah, Jeff, that's been my big soapbox from the very beginning. It's about the quote agents in this space. All right. Oh, do you have one last thing you want to say, John? Sorry.
I was just going to say, with in football going from 2 transfer portals down to 1, down to that January timeframe, a lot of these deals in the past have been structured with a carrot out there that comes after the transfer portal to try to keep student athletes from going in there. But as we get down to 1 transfer portal, I think you may even see it even more. The interesting thing is going to be, I think it's the 2nd to the 17th of January. Those teams that are still participating in the CFP, what the movement's going to be like on those rosters, potentially when teams are even, I guess the final 2, the last day, you'll still have the 2 teams who are vying for a national championship. But it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out as well. But I think you're going to continue to see carrots dangled after student athletes are locked in, if you will, to their current institution.
All right. Thank you so much, gentlemen. And thank you, everybody who joined us live and asked great questions. We really appreciate you and hope to be able to come back soon with another topic for all of you. We'll keep you posted when we schedule another one of these. But thank you for joining us live. And thank you, gentlemen, for sharing your knowledge with us.
Thank you, Christy, and thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Christy. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.